I call to order this Personnel and Policy Committee meeting on February 18th. Please join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. And then can we get a roll call?
Elizabeth Dauberman.
Here.
Mary Lee Hall.
Here.
Samantha Hall.
Here.
William Hall. Jeremy Hesh. Jennifer Henkel. Nathan Henkel.
Here.
James Holly.
Here.
Joseph Wilson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then item 2 is public comment. It doesn't look like we have any. Is that correct? Okay, correct. Just want to make sure. Okay. All right. And then moving on to item 3.01, we have a human resource update, and is that Lori and Sue? Thank you so much for being here. You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh, forgot my clip.
Oh, you're good. You're good. You can click.
Good evening, everyone. So we're going to just walk through a couple things with HR. Lori's going to do most of it. I'm just going to start stuff off. We're going to take a look at the number of staff that we have in the district and those that have turned over the years and why that might be. Those that we've hired and what we look at, what HR looks at when we're looking at to hire to get a good fit for our district, and what we do to keep our employees here in the district. So we'll start with, got it? We'll start with resignations by year. So we're going to take a look at some numbers, then we're going to talk about some of the things. So if we look at resignations by year from the current year back to 2020, 2021, one thing you'll notice as you go down through, we have the total at the bottom in red, and then below that we have retirement. So over the previous 3 years to this one, we had about 48 retirements in the district. So I've been doing this a long time, almost 25 years, and one of the things that we do note is this happens in districts where you go from a very mature staff, then you go to a new staff, then you go to a mature staff again, so it is very cyclical. We had a pretty mature staff. We had a lot of retirements in the last couple of years. We don't really have that many that we're aware of coming up, or those that are eligible. We have a younger staff at this point, further away from retirement. The other thing is we kind of go through here, just kind of keeping in your mind when we look at turnover, the number of staff that we have. We have about 371 full-time staff and then 26 part-time staff. So that gives us a little under 400 regular, what we consider regular employees. We also have coaches and co-curricular and supplemental positions. They are not included in these numbers as they're just small parts of the year. These are our regular full and part-time employees. Kind of turn it over to Lori.
All right. So you might ask yourself, with those big numbers of people leaving, why are they leaving? So we do perform exit interviews, and we want to get feedback from people when they're leaving the district so that we know, what it is that they're looking for, where they're headed to. And the number one, as you saw at the bottom, retirement. I mean, that's what we all work for. We certainly can't hold them accountable for leaving because they've worked their lives and they're ready to retire. So that's certainly a great thing for their retirement. But a lot of times they let me know that it's an opportunity to move closer to family. Maybe they had come here after college and their family's back home in Texas or Virginia or whatever the case might be. Or how about our younger staff, like Sue mentioned, that realize maybe they're financially able to stay home with their families now that they're raising their families and they want to just stay home. And sometimes they are leaving the profession, even when it comes to teaching. And let's face it, with all of our careers, we all pick a career path and we think that's the career path that we want to do. All children didn't grow up to be firemen and nurses like they thought they would as kids. You pick a career path, and before you know it, you realize it's not the right fit for you. Unfortunately, that happens with teachers, with paraprofessionals, principals, custodians. They realize this wasn't really what they thought it was going to be, so they move on. Another thing, and we're going to talk a little bit about benefits too, is the rate of pay versus their take-home pay versus their compensation package. So let's face it, you come to work for a school district and you've got that great pension, but that means that 7.5% to 10.5% of your pay is coming out to go into that pension. And sometimes people realize that's a big hit for them financially While it's great for down the road, they need the money in their paycheck now. And it's not an option to waive that pension. So that can be impacting. And then we talk about the benefits. Well, the benefits don't mean everything to everybody at the same time. I'm in my mid-50s. They're pretty important. The 25, 26-year-old that we're hiring, they don't even know what benefits they need yet. So looking at the benefits package, it is different for each person as you go through. And then there's other reasons too, but these are some of the bigger things that we find in the exit interviews, why people are leaving or staying in education.
Just a, do you have any idea, just with the people that leave, about what percentage? Do they all fill out exit interviews? Is it?
I'll be honest, we do not have a high percentage. We
Okay.
give it to them, we follow up with them. It is a Google survey. We even offer to do it in person or to meet with someone. Like if somebody said to me, I'd like to fill it out, but I'd really like to meet with Dr. Bryson to do it. They can do that. We give them lots of opportunities, but they don't always follow up on it.
Thank you.
Yep. So now we're going to talk, they're the people that have gone out, we're going to talk about the vacant positions. Now keep in mind when you're looking at these numbers, we ran it for the vacancies that we're dealing with when school starts. So when we open the door on the first student day, how many vacancies are there? There could be somebody that later down the road resigns in October, and we might not fill that position until February, but we're talking about the positions that are open on day one when school starts. So that has decreased for teachers. The COVID year, 2021, was a little bit different. But 21, 22, that was the year I first started here. I started on August 3rd. I think 8 people resigned, 15 were hired, and we had 7 vacancies. I was like, oh my. So that year we started with 7 teachers missing in the building. 2 support staff and 3 versus now you have a little bit higher support staff. Please keep in mind, a lot of those folks that aren't going to return that are support staff, they don't resign until August. They don't let us know in June that they're not going to come back. They decide in August that they're going to stay home or move on to something different. So we have a real tight turnaround to fill those positions before the first day of school. Now, currently, today, in February 18th, we right now have 1 teacher vacancy, 2 support staff vacancies, they're both part-time paraprofessionals, and 2 custodian vacancies, 1 part-time and 1 full-time. So that's what we're looking at trying to fill at this moment. So each year we onboard staff. Last year, as you can see, was quite a year. Keep in mind that's not going to match your resignations because, again, that fit that people are looking for, we may have filled one position multiple times. A paraprofessional may have started in August, decided in November it wasn't the right fit for them. We hire somebody else in January. They might decide it's not the right fit for them, so on with the custodians, especially in our support staff. For lots of reasons. Maybe they think these working hours are good, or second shift will work for their family, or the school hours work for their family, but they realize they're still not home when their kid needs to leave or get home. Just different things, especially a lot of times when moms are coming back to work, they realize it's more impacting than what they thought. Or aging family. A lot of times we've been told they need to go home to take care of aging family too. So this is the onboarding that we do. And again, this doesn't include the coach and extracurricular positions that we hire each year as well. I feel good that so far for 24-25, we're at 36 to date. It has slowed down a little bit, which is nice. Now, I know I've talked to some of you in the past about emergency permits, so not all of our teachers hold a certificate from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. They could be working on an emergency permit. I want to explain the 2 different types and how that's changed over the years. So a type 01 is a teacher that we're going to hire, not a type 04 where it's a long-term sub where they're just filling a temporary vacancy, like for a teacher that's out on leave, for example. So we're hiring a teacher, and a lot of times it's in those specialty fields, sciences, special education, foreign languages. They're hard to find teachers. So they need to work on a type 01 emergency permit. That means they have a bachelor's degree, and it means that they're entering a program, and each year they have to do so many credits to fulfill their education obligation. And then it comes down to the end where they have a year or 2, depending on how their timing is, to test. So they have a certain time frame to complete the program and to get their testing so that they're certified. Also, it could mean that they are a certified teacher, but they've decided to go into the specialty area. So maybe I hold an elementary certificate, and I've been teaching for 15 years. I have a lot of experience, but I've decided I want to be a special ed teacher. Well, now I'm working under an emergency permit because I'm not certified for elementary. So some could hold a teaching certificate, but now going into a specialty area to add that on. And you can see that number was pretty high in 23, 24. But again, a person could be in the 22, 23 bucket and the 23, 24 because they're working on that education obligation. Last year, we had several that completed their certification, completed their testing, and came off the list. So that was really good. And of the 4 that we have, I think 2 more are going to finish this year. So that's good. And then the type 04 emergency permits, again, that's no education obligation. That's where I'm a substitute. You need me to fill a vacancy for a teacher that's out on leave, and I'm going to get this long-term emergency permit, fill it for this year, and that's all. I'm not trying to become a certified teacher, or maybe I want to try it for a year and then get into one of those programs. It's an opportunity for them to see how things are too.
And the one thing I wanted to add when we were looking at this slide, we did pull up 23, 24 because that is a much larger number. The majority of those are teachers that are going into a different area. So they're certified teachers that are choosing to go into a specialty area that we need.
Oh, and let me also add, they could be certified in another state as a teacher, but Pennsylvania is very rigorous. It does not transfer over, so they may have to take extra courses. Maybe they've taught down in Maryland for a few years and now they're coming up. So it could be that as well. So what exactly does HR do and what are we trying to do to help? HR loves our Southern family. We want to hire people one time. We want them to come in the door, and we want to help them with their exit interview when they retire from the district. Ideally, that's our goal. So we want everybody to feel like this is their family, that they're welcome here. Some of the things that I've done in the last couple of years, I now attend the year 1, 2, and 3 teacher meetings. That's what they do for induction. And I just try to put myself out there as visible as I can, help them with their tuition reimbursements, help them with their column movements, any questions that they might have, make sure they're staying on track with all their certification requirements, and making sure I remind them of those great benefits that we have as we go along. I also take the time to do one-on-one onboarding meetings. That gives them that personal touch. That way, the minute that they've completed that last piece of paperwork that allows us to hire them, they're meeting with me, they feel connected. It might be June, it might be July, it might be August, but I'm in touch with them. So the minute I give them our benefits and finish that paperwork and give them that personal attention, I do that. I check in with them throughout the year, usually at a 90-day check-in. I do benefit reviews throughout the year with all employees, not just teachers, all of our support staff as well. And then with open enrollment, we're available for our benefits. Because let's face it, on day one, when I tell that 25-year-old about our EAP, our Employee Assistance Program, or about the vision, and they don't have bad eyes yet, but now 15 years, they'll say, what is our vision plan that we have? Meeting them with their needs when they need to hear about our benefits. They can't absorb it all on day one. And just really being there and making sure that they feel connected with me so that when they need to take that child rearing leave down the road, or they have questions about their benefits, or they need help with their certification, that they've connected with HR and they can pick up the phone and make a call and know who they're talking to. And then by talking to them and meeting them at these meetings and hearing the things that they say, I like to work with administration to bring about attention if there's an employee concern about something they're not liking or something that's going on, so that I can share that information with administration and hopefully get things, addressed before they become a bigger problem. And with that, that's the end. But certainly, what questions do you guys have for me?
Looking back at the vacant positions at the start of each year, you mentioned that support staff typically will let you know in August.
A lot of times.
Is there any way of incentivizing, basically, either making the decision in June or staying on? So I would say you don't want to incentivize people to not stay,
Right.
but could there be an incentive for people who either let you know in June or stay on, and that incentive, if it's a cash incentive, just as a really simple example, that it'd be paid out after the beginning of the school year, for anyone who's kind of committed to stay on. Or anybody, it would be paid out to anybody who let you know by a certain date in June, that, look, I'm not coming back. I don't know how much of a problem it is. Like, I imagine it would be a problem. And so if there's a way to put a value on that, is there a way to incentivize them to,
It's
yeah.
probably a more recent occurrence than
Okay.
what we used to have in the past. The one thing we do, you cannot retire during the summer. You have to stay a semester. So for retirement purposes, because we don't want that happening with people retiring. So you either need to leave at the end of the school year or you need to stay the first semester. So we do that for retirement purposes. We've also put, we did have some folks just coming back for like a week or two and using all their leave and then leaving. So we now have that covered by, you owe all that money back. As far as the incentivizing, I'm just not sure how that will work, because what happens, here's my little bit concern. If you tell us in June that you're coming back and we give you something, how do I get that back when you don't come? Or
Yeah, the idea would be it wouldn't be paid out
it wouldn't
until.
be paid out until later. We do $100 for the cost of clearances for our support staff. If they have to, if they have to re-up their clearances, and they have to stay for a certain amount of time to keep that money, otherwise we take it back. We can consider that. I'm just not sure how we would make it work, but we can look at that.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
a possibility
Yeah.
if it turns out to be worth it for the not having to have that scramble in August or September. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
But the bigger incentive, let me say this though, because here's what's rolling in my mind. A lot of times we have that because they have insurance benefits over the summer. So we would have to give them a lot of money for it to be worth they're not getting the insurance.
Okay.
Because it's really our 9-month staff that's where we're running into. So that's where the challenge arises, I think, is okay, could we give them that would be worth
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Okay.
But we can look at it, but these are I'm rolling it around in my head.
And a few that come to mind, I know they had family or medical issues that hit them in August. So they really didn't wait till the last minute.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But all of a sudden, it's like, oh, working or going home to take care of my mom, they have shared that this just came up. They wanted to try to make it work. And we usually, at the beginning of the year, as you can see, have a couple paraprofessional or positions open that we certainly encourage them, would you want to stay part-time? Can you stay with us but in a different capacity? And sometimes people do move to those positions.
I have a question just on the emergency permits. So do we know, when you were going into that 2023, I mean, I guess it probably started in 2022, 2023. You picked up some, and then they continued, and then you had some new ones come in, and then they kind of finished out. Do we just know what was I mean, I know that overall teacher, we have less of them, but do you know why people were coming in for that? Do you know if that trend will still hold? It seems like it did decrease a little bit. So I was just wondering if when you did your onboarding, if you heard from people what their interest was, if there was a particular external environmental factor that was driving that, or just change of life.
I think it was just a change of career, just like the people that maybe left, changed their career to leave education. They had a heart to change a career and come into education, and their degrees were maybe in something totally different. I'm trying to think of the 4 names in my head, and I feel like all but one was on last year as well, so we only had one new one.
Got it.
This year, and I'm pretty sure that 2 of the 4 are going to complete this year. So if we don't have any new ones next year, that number should be going down
Right.
as well.
Right. And then my other question was, and I don't even know if this is the right question to ask, but we have student teachers come in, right? Are we ever able to hire them, or are they just from other geographical locations that aren't here? So I didn't know if that was kind of a potential pipeline for us as well.
Often we do.
Okay.
So we really fill them in for those child rearing leaves that are coming up right after they finish their student teaching. And we've secured several of those. We even have one right now who is not planning to stay in the area, but she stayed in the area long enough to fill a long-term sub position for us for child rearing leave before she goes back home. So our goal is maybe she decides this is going to be home. So yes, and we immediately reach out to our student teachers and talk to them about getting on our sub list, because a lot of times they finish right at the beginning of May. They can still sub for a couple weeks before the school year ends and try to help them. So I would say that we have hired quite a few of our student teachers and filled them in long-term sub positions.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else?
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. You all know where to find me if you have any questions.
All right, thank you.
Do we need to turn this off? Okay.
All right. Moving on to 3.02, we will have a first reading of board policies for the current policy cycle. I call this the winter cycle because they get distributed in January. We do a first read in February and then a second read in March. And then we new this year is we added another policy cycle for the spring, which will be April, May, and June. So I always like to give a little context when we do these, just because I know when I wasn't a board member, I didn't fully understand all of that. So as per our board policy review schedule, the policies discussed at this committee meeting were distributed to board members at the January board meeting. Tonight, I will bring each policy up for discussion and share the nature of the revision or the creation to the policy. This is an opportunity for our board members and the public, should they have any comments after the fact, to share any input, but there's no voting action tonight. We will then review these policies and/or revisions at the board meeting on Thursday as a first read, and then the policies will be published after that for public review, and then we will move to that second read in March, and then we will have our board vote. And upon passage of the votes, the policies are then final approved and effective. And then the second piece I always like to go over is kind of what are the prompts? Why do these things come up? And so they can come up for a couple different reasons. So the Pennsylvania Department of Education can enact a law that would require a change to our policy. A school board member, staff, admin could request that we review a policy. There could be a legal challenge where PSBA recommends a revision, which are actually a lot of the ones that we have on for tonight. Or there could be, again, an assessment, an administrative assessment that the policy needs to be updated or combined. So at this point in the meeting, I like to categorize things just because that makes me helpful to understand. So I am going to go through our policies and I am going to look first at what our new policy is. So the new policy that we have proposed is 113.1, Discipline of Students with Disabilities. This policy is recommended as we do not have a current policy. So we're looking to add that, and we would be looking to recommend adopting the full PSBA version of that. So I certainly can open it up as I go through each of these categories if anybody has any questions, but I'll just open it if anybody on the board had any questions to this particular policy. Okay, moving through. Now I'm going to go through the policies that were updated or revised, and we have 11 of those. And so the first one is 005, organization. And PSBA recommends revisions to the officers and appointments section of the policy to reflect a court ruling regarding removal of members of the board. And so really this is, again, something that came from PSBA. Don't know if anybody has any questions to it. I had a question if this was included somewhere else for transparency, but I don't remember what that question was. I don't know, did any of you guys have any? I don't know why I said that. Okay. Anyway, moving forward, 113.2, behavior support. This, and then sometimes policies are mandated. So this is an example of a mandated policy, and the PSBA revisions include terminology changes from the school code and legal citations. So oftentimes there's just updates to that. The next policy is 202, non-resident students. This also is a mandated policy, and the PSBA revisions include the requirements should a non-resident student need to be disenrolled. The next policy is 218 on student discipline, also a mandated policy, and the PSBA revisions include terminology changes with school code and legal citations. And then the next policy is 218.1. This is on weapons. Again, a mandated policy, and the PSBA revisions are made specifically to the parts of the policy under authority and delegation of responsibility and the guidelines section. Moving forward to 218.2, terroristic threats. PSBA made revisions to the section of this policy under delegation of responsibility and guidelines just pertaining to the threat assessment teams. In policy 227, controlled substances paraphernalia, PSBA revisions clarify the prohibitions of controlled substances. The next one is 236.1, that's on threat assessment. And PSBA revisions were made on terminology changes from the school code and legal citations. But then also 4 additional training guidelines were recommended through PSBA. And so those have been incorporated into our policy as well. Almost at the end. The next one is 254. That's educational opportunity for military children. This is a mandated policy, and the PSBA revisions were just more of format. So we were merging separate definitions for uniform services into one definition, and then the National Guard was added to children of military families as far as the definition. Next one is 308, Employment Contract Board Resolution. The PSBA revisions address the submission and acceptance of resignations for all employees. So again, that came from PSBA. And then the last one that we have under this section is 801, Public Records. This also is a mandated policy, and the PSBA revisions clarify the district responsibilities regarding the right to know law. So again, that was 11. Those are revisions. Does anybody have any questions or comments on any of the ones under that section? Okay, excellent. All right, so moving forward, now we're getting to the category of retired policies. So these would be policies that would be recommended to be retired for one reason or another. So 004.1 is our student board representative policy. And so there was a recommendation to retire this particular policy and use the PSBA guidelines as the guide for the conduct for student representatives. And since I'm on this one, I did have a question about this, Sue. I didn't know where the guidelines were or what they said, and I just wondered, should those what are the guidelines for that? Like, where would we find those?
They're under administrative regulations.
So I was just proposing that maybe, I understand why it's an administrative regulation because it's an internal school, but I will say that when we onboarded our new student rep this year, since I was not there for the last time, it was super helpful to be able to read that. And I know we don't always see the administrative regulations, so I wondered if it would make sense to just include that, just keep the policy so that but then update it with the guidelines, just so that the board, when the next turnover comes, that we would know what they are. Because I don't think anybody would know to look for them in the ARs.
Have we put the ARs in the personnel and policy folder yet?
We have not.
Okay.
Yeah, we were going to do it at the end of this cycle, if
Okay.
you remember, yeah.
Gotcha.
So we can do that, or, I mean, we can distribute those if you prefer those guidelines. I mean, the only reason why I'm hesitating is, one of the things is we're looking at it for longevity is if there's not a PSBA policy for something, it's not, unless we pull it and send it for a legal review, it's not kept up legally.
Yeah, I understand.
So that was my hesitation of keeping the policy when it's not supported, because I guess, let me think about, the other thing we could do is we could potentially put it under the board membership policy. I forget what the number of that one is.
Right.
It might be 004 itself.
Right.
And we could put something about student reps in there, and that
Just
way.
because it's a help, it's the thing that we are all oriented towards looking at. I mean, we know the ARs are more really for like the internal operations of the schools and not the governance. So that was the only reason why I suggested it, was just, as we move forward, it's just nice to be able to see what the student rep does if you haven't been on the board and you don't know. And it was just a great way to be able to onboard Caleb.
I agree, and for the students to be able to access it too in the policies very easily when they're looking to run, what that looks like, what their job is, and then when the officers sit with them when they're onboarding, it is helpful to go through that information.
So I would definitely be open if it was easy to put it in the membership, just to include it there.
Yeah, so one thought, again, let me think through it after the meeting, but one thought I have is we could potentially put something in the membership policy that's existing and then do an attachment. Don't do it as an administrative regulation, do it as an attachment.
Right.
That way then we can update the attachments
Right.
as needed, depending on. One reason why we wanted to go to guidelines was, let's say there's these great ideas, like we didn't want to bring it back through policy, because some of it becomes, when you're working with students, like student input and understanding. So I think we could possibly do as an attachment. We could do that next cycle if that's something, I don't know, Bob, if you have thoughts on.
No, my thought was included under membership and have a subsection for student rep, and here's the guidelines and expectation from, which is in part what,
That's what we have now.
the way it is now, but it's not, it wouldn't be separate, so to speak.
Right.
And Mrs. Green, in 004, at the very end of the policy, there is a section for student representation, and there's a line that just indicates the board authorizes student representation of the board in order to facilitate effective communication, and that could be also another place. There's already a place designated in 004 for student participation
Okay.
or representation.
So we can take a look at that for the next cycle if you'd like to do that.
Or could it just be revised for next time, or we should?
Well, if we revise it for next time, then we would
We
have
have
to
to do
start
another-
again.
yeah, right,
And
okay.
so that's why I thought, since we
Okay.
have another cycle coming up. that-
Sure. So then we would put that in the spring cycle.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, the next one under retired policies is 225, interviewing students in school. And so we are recommending retiring this policy due to information being covered in policies 806 on child abuse and 907 on school visitations. I did have some thoughts on this. I didn't know if anybody else had any thoughts on it. So when I was reading this policy, what I was looking at was how was it incorporated into 806 and 907? And it seems to me that they speak to different points, because 225 really is kind of a parental consent for students to be interviewed in situations outside of abuse, whereas the visitation policy seems like that's really more purpose towards building and classroom safety and not the student safety. So I was having a hard time making the link that they were kind of interchangeable. They seem like they really speak to different things. And so the rationale for 225 just talks about, since we have compulsory attendance laws, that imposes custodianship on children while they're in the school, and the school is responsible to the parent for those hours that the child is in the school. And so in that particular situation, children should not be permitted to be interviewed or questioned by any person or agency outside the school district without the consent of the parent or the legal guardian, again, except when necessary if it's in the investigation of a county public welfare agency. And so I was just thinking about our, our mission and our vision, and so much of that has to do with the family partnership, that it felt to retire this one, it doesn't seem like the spirit of it is really included in 806 or 907. So I don't know if anybody on the board has any thoughts about that, but just the read seemed a little bit different.
And if I can interject there, Mrs. Hall, when you look at the 254, the policy 225, which was a district-adopted policy going back to the 004.1.
Right.
That PSBA no longer supports. The specific component regarding the child abuse, which it does speak to in 225 about the interviewing of students, which is a component that is covered in 806, which is specific to when you have agencies that are speaking to students, what will be our procedures, which is 806 is a current board policy. And then regarding school visitors in 907, the provisions that are in there is to keep an eye when people are coming into school and having that interaction with and speaking with students. That's why we saw the cross connection between 806 and 907 that covered most of the components, because really, when you look at agencies coming in to speak to our students, we want to make sure that our students are being protected, which is covered under the child abuse reporting in 806.
Well, I actually saw that it was more protective if we kept the 225, because if it's not child abuse, then if there are other agencies that are coming in for other reasons, the parent wouldn't have to be notified for that. So to me, keeping it, but I understand what you're saying about, it's a district policy, it's not supported by PSBA, and then it becomes the whole thing of the review. But the 2 points of differentiation that I saw were just that the school visitation seemed really focused on access to school buildings and classrooms, but also the people that were part of school visitations were different. They weren't necessarily the agencies. So it talked about parents and guardians, it talked about other adult residents of the community, educators and other officials. So that to me is more, it's a different kind of a thing than different agencies coming in for that. So I don't know, again, I'm a word person, I focused on that. I don't know if anybody else had any thoughts on it.
I definitely did. I looked through the policy changes and the information that said that it was covered in policy 806 and 907, and I was also confused about where to find that information about parental consent to be able to interview a child. And I could see that the 806 was focused mainly on child abuse and the definitions of what that could mean. And then 907 was more geared towards visitation rather than a purposeful connection with a student to interview. So that was one of my questions too. What was the original thought to request this for review from the social services coordinator? What were the specific sentences in those 806 and 907 policies that seem to overlap with the one that wants to be retired in 225?
Well, more specifically, when we looked at the policies that the social services coordinator would be part of, because there will be some that'll come in our next cycle.
Okay.
We took a look specifically at what are the current policies, which ones do PSBA have updates for,
Okay.
and then this one with 225 was one that we were informed that did not have a policy, that it was retired. And from my understanding, it was locally created, well, or it may have been PSBA at that time, or whoever did, back in 1992.
Yeah, I saw that.
Are you saying that some of the protections that this would provide are coming in the next policy cycle?
No, there are other policies that, going back to what Mrs. Hall had asked, there were several policies that she wanted us to bring to take a look at, one being attendance, which will come in our spring cycle. But this was one that we saw that was retired by PSBA that we brought forward to the board as a recommendation for retirement.
Yeah, I guess to get really specific, from 225, the sentence, "Children shall not be permitted to be interviewed and/or questioned by any person and/or agency outside the school district without the consent of the parent and/or legal guardian, except when necessary in the conduct of an investigation by the county public welfare agency." I think I see how 806 covers the exception, that if it's necessary to conduct an investigation by the county public welfare agency, 806 probably covers that exception. I'd have to read it through. But the first part, which is the restriction, I don't think 806, I don't see where 806 covers that restriction, and the closest thing I can find in 907 is no visitor may confer with a student in school without the approval of the principal. And the principal is, that's not the same as the parent or guardian. And so, and of course, we have people come into our schools to address students with the presentation, without going to parents for approval every time. But to actually interview a student, to question a student, is a more invasive form of interaction. And I'm not comfortable changing what we've had, where the parent or guardian needs to be notified. If you're having someone from the outside come and actually ask questions to a student, I don't think the principal's enough. I think it's got to be, because as a parent, that they could get very, very angry. And I would imagine our principals wouldn't do that, but I think having the protection in policy made sense. Yeah.
So any suggestions on how we would handle that? Would we just keep it as it is? Or would we try to incorporate it into, I mean, it doesn't make sense to go into child abuse because that's very specific about that. And school visitations, in my mind, feels more like when you have legislators coming in, or you've got parents coming in, or you've got, Keller Williams coming in and doing the reading of the book. So the agency part of it feels different to me, but I mean, I'm open for whatever anybody thinks is the best way to do that.
One thought we could confer with the solicitor, because obviously deals with a lot of school districts, and see if there's a particular place versus us having a whole different policy.
Right.
Is there another policy that it makes sense to put that because what I feel like you're zoning in, the area specifically is paragraph 2 under guidelines. Is that what we're?
Of 225?
Yes.
That's the one that really stands out to me, but I'd like to look at some more. That's the one that jumped off the page at me as okay, this is different from, I don't see these same protections anywhere else. But I'm not saying there isn't anywhere else
Okay.
that, so, I think at a minimum, it sounds like we probably want to leave this one in place for the moment, because what we're talking about doing is either possibly going through this and maybe removing content that is duplicative of others, or trying to carve this up and move it into policies where maybe pieces of it fit better, as long as, so I think maybe we need to go through and each of us that is interested can go through and identify the specific protections that we want to preserve, and then make sure that those either continue in an updated version of this policy or get absorbed into others.
So does it, just making sure we understand the direction we're going, is this another one we want to maybe move to the next cycle and then take a look at it through the next cycle?
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, it seems good. Okay.
Since we have a cycle coming April, May,
Right,
June.
right, we don't have to wait until the fall. Okay, thank you for that discussion and clarification, I appreciate that. Policy 327 is the management team, and so this was recommended for retiring as information is covered in other policies. I promise I don't have a different recommendation for this. I just was curious as to what the origin of this policy was. I don't know what the management team is. I mean, I read what they had there, but it didn't really sort of coincide with what people that would be. And I feel like there was probably a reason why it was included. So I'm assuming we're retiring it because it's not covered by PSBA. It was our own district policy. Is that correct?
Yes, and additionally, I'm pulling it up, sorry.
Okay.
Additionally, I think it's so outdated that, actually having trouble pulling it up. It's so outdated that there's not a lot of meaning to it. Let me see if I
Okay,
can find it.
so you're feeling like you don't really use that management team concept anymore? Okay.
We have the administrative team, but I think it's different than, let me pull this, because for some reason,
Well, and there's a reference that the same information is covered in other policies, but I wasn't sure what policies they were.
as we go through the employee section, which, and as you remember, we're combining the 300s, 400, 500s together. When we look at particular policies, we're addressing the administrative team, professional staff, and then support staff in each area. So this management team concept is incorporated in there. There just didn't seem to be a lot of significance to like what we're doing
Okay.
in here.
I mean, since PSBA sent the recommendation that this be retired, did they provide any longer explanation of where else, what other policies? No, they don't, okay.
No, and part of this becomes, this is a 1992 policy, so it could have been retired long already.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I had questions on it just because I didn't know. And then 529 is substitute compensation. That is recommended for retirement as the language on compensation was moved into policy 305. That seemed very straightforward. And then the last category of changes that we have would be, we started a project in the spring of 2023 to eliminate redundancy with separate categories for administrative, professional, and support employees. And so these three are comprised of being combined into that. So the first one is 313, evaluation of employees, currently under PSBA review for updating next year. So there could be an update to that next year, but also in the meantime, you were suggesting that we would merge it into the 300 employee category. The next one is 324, personnel files. Again, no changes to that one. This would strictly be merging it into the 300 employee category. And then 331, job-related expenses. Again, no changes, just something strictly that we would be merging into that 300 employee category. So didn't know if anybody had any questions on that. It seemed pretty straightforward. Okay. So that's everything under 3.02. And then item 3.03, other items of business. I have none. Item 4, new business. I have none. And so item 5, adjournment. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Yep, okay. Then, any nays or abstentions? Okay, hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.